Okay. We talked, last several weeks, we've talked about Islam, and in some ways, Hinduism is less controversial, certainly, than Islam right now. But more complicated, and I'm not sure, in part the complication is there are some views represented by Hinduism that are very foreign to us. So unless you've read something about it, you might say, why? What is that? So I'm going to try to make some sense out of Hinduism. Very glad to have Naveen with us. Now, Naveen grew up in India. He is a Christian. He's also a member of our church, as is his wife, Sarisha. And I've said this before, if I say something and Naveen says something that's different, listen to him. Much of what I will say is a classic interpretation. By classic, this will be some orthodox ideas about Hinduism. And just as if you're talking about Christianity, not everyone who is a Christian believes what Christians believe, and certainly not all of us who are Christians practice what Christians say. But I hope at least what I will say is accurate, if not complete. But I would invite you to raise some questions. If you have a question, say, what is that? And we'll see how it goes. Would you? This is India. You can see where it's located, generally, in relationship to Pakistan and China.
I want to see, Naveen, can you show us the part
Yeah,
of India where you and Sharish?
Very good, yes.
What can I point out to us?
This southern part, actually.
Very good, thank you, Jim.
I just have to, I don't very often we don't often have to.
This is the part I live in. This is called Andhra Pradesh, the southern part. Yeah.
So, southern
Southern part.
India.
Yeah.
Now, thanks. India, population, these are round figures, but 1.2 billion. 80% of Indians are Hindu. 15% are Muslims, and that's the third largest Muslim population in the world, which I didn't realize. I had some inkling of that because I have a computer that is frequently inhabited by gremlins, and in getting help with it, I talked with someone in, I think, New Delhi, and I said, "Oh, you must be Hindu." He said, "No, I'm Muslim." So there are Muslims, and not just one or two, but a large Muslim population in India. And there are Christians in India. I knew that our son, when he was in graduate school, had an Indian roommate, and visited for about 6 weeks. And this young man was a Christian. But you can see 2.5% of the population. Buddhism, and we'll be talking about Buddhism probably in the fall, 0.8%. And what's interesting about that number is the Buddha was born a Hindu. And so Buddhism got its start in India, but then was mostly absorbed. Okay?
And just as a help for frame of reference for us, the population of the United States now is about how much? 300 million?
Yeah, 300 million.
So that means that India is 4 times as many people as what we have in the U.S. Just as a
Right.
frame. And you saw the landmass size. I don't know. You know, I mean, how does the landmass of India compare with the United States? Do you know?
It's smaller than United States, but the population is more equal than 4 times.
So it's dense then. You can see that there's a lot of people in this small little area, it sounds like. Larger cities, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Although 25% urban, large, still rural, but dense population. Now, it's hard to know where I had trouble finding where to start, but something that people hear about with India is the caste system. And I've said there are 4 main castes, plus outcasts. And the various castes had names which I once knew and could almost pronounce. But priestly caste, warrior administrative caste, producers, artisans, and farmers, workers, and unskilled laborers. There are about 3,000 subcastes. Now, Naveen's grandfather, who said converted to Christianity, was he consciously in a caste prior to that?
What is?
One of the castes.
Yeah, he belongs to the fourth caste, workers and skilled laborers. Yeah.
And there's interest. Go ahead, Jay. So 4 castes, and how do you get in a caste? You're born into a caste and expected to marry into the caste to which one has been born. So it's, we might say, well, our view that the American dream, Abe Lincoln was born in a cabin and grew up and became president. How does upward or downward mobility work if you're born into a caste? Caste has an occupational definition, which entails a set of moral and religious obligations. We have something vaguely analogous to that. If your parents owned a business, young men grow up and get into the family business. Nancy and I have 3 children, all involved in education. They insisted growing up that they were not going to get involved in education. But certainly there was no religious requirement that they be teachers, because their parents were teachers. But this is an occupational definition, which is also a moral and religious definition. Now, if you're born into a particular caste, how do you earn and get merit religiously? Well, it's something called Dharma. Naveen will correct my pronunciation later, but Dharma, which is fulfilling the duties associated with the caste to which one has been born. So, if you have been born into a particular caste or a subcaste, now things are actually more fluid than I'm suggesting. Is apparently people would do historical research, and you do historical research, and maybe you're part of the worker class, but then you find out you have some ancestors that were in the administrative caste, and there may have been some manipulation of the historical research. But fulfill the duties that belong to your caste. Now, at this point, you've perhaps heard of reincarnation. And this, for Hinduism, reincarnation, you have a soul, Atman. And when the body dies, it decays, but the soul lives on and is reincarnated into another body. Now, how does upward or downward mobility come about? Well, if you fulfill your Dharma, depending on how well you fulfill your Dharma, you can be born into a higher caste than you're in now. And you can be born into a lower caste. So there is upward and downward mobility built into the system. But at least in classical Hinduism, you could move up one at a time. That is, you can't go from being a worker to in the priestly caste. That would take several reincarnations. So there is a, I don't have a slide on this, and you don't need one, but if you take my word for it, there is a sociologist, Max Weber, who focused his study on how was it that capitalism arose in the West, and not in China, and not in India. One of the, and he also, his study indicated that it was more prominent in Protestants than in Catholics. Now we're talking about the late Middle Ages, or the early modern period. One thing he pointed out is capitalism, to thrive, needs a number of things, but one is social mobility. My father was a laundryman. Eventually got his own laundry business, but he had his own truck and business and so forth. I didn't know it, but I was going to college when I was 2 years old. that was part of the ethos. So there was no, rather than there being an expectation that I'll become a laundryman, there was an expectation that I will go to college and be something else. Didn't even have to think about it. Which is a good thing, because my father built up his laundry group during World War II, and that was before we had women working in factories, and everybody didn't have a washing machine. So the number of laundry jobs would be far, far less. But this is not a system that aids social mobility and economic mobility. It isn't a system which favors kind of economic structure that we have and take for granted. Okay, Dharma, D-H-A-R-M-A, is your duty in your caste, fulfilling your duty, which is a religious obligation, and it's a religious obligation to do what your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents did, which is okay. And you've got children in the business. And our kids have gone into education. And that's okay, but it's not a sin if you do something else, or a failure. But this is another word called karma, K-A-R-M-A, not to be confused with dharma, but if you do confuse it, don't worry about it. But karma is the moral law of cause and effect, which means whatever happens to you in this life is deserved because it's a result of something you've done, either in this life or in your previous life. So, if you were born poor, you deserve it. Because even in a previous life, you did something, failed to live up to your dharma, did something immoral, and that carries over into the next life. And it's good to remember that what you do in this life is not going to be over when you die. Yeah?
I hear more and more people using that word, good karma or bad, or how it affects you, and that I've never heard before, but just in recent years.
Yes, that's true. Talk about my karma, and it's not necessarily, well, people using that word have not necessarily been to India or read a lot. It's become part of the popular. Another relationship which we're perhaps familiar with, and this is Christian Science. You're familiar with that, and Christian scientists, not Christians who are scientists, but Christians who are part of that, don't believe in modern medicine. And there is a reason, and there's a rationale for it. And that was Mary Baker Eddy was influenced, 19th century, by Hindu thought. The reason they don't believe in modern medicine is we are spiritual centers of consciousness and don't really have bodies. We have minds Now, if you're sick, therefore, that is a mental problem. Universally, now, people can have mental problems and get sick, and we all believe that your mind and attitude can affect you physically. But that creates certain interesting problems in medicine. Is what happens, or what does the state do if there's a child, a minor, that has appendicitis? If that's confusing, it is confusing. It's counterintuitive, but I mean that's an effect. So there's a lot of effects on our culture that we're not aware of. But one of the things is my karma is guiding me. Now, what is salvation? Salvation is escape from the wheel of rebirth. It's not being born again. That's a good term for us, right? You must be born again. It's stopping the process of endless reincarnation. Being born again and again and again and again is not a good thing. It's not reaching the point where you are being all that you can be. That's good Western ideology. We should develop ourselves. Rather, it's losing self-centeredness to the point where the individual soul, the Atman, becomes one with the Brahman, the world soul. Now, we aspire to heaven. But in our aspiration to heaven, we don't hope to be absorbed by God. When we say, I want to be one with the Lord, we understand it that we will still be a spiritual center of consciousness, and that we'll know each other, but we'll know God. Reincarnation is something that's bad, and it needs to be stopped. Now, avoided. Another one, Jay?
I got one quick question.
Sure.
When you're
I
reincarnated,
may not give you a quick answer, or any answer, but go ahead,
when
yeah.
you're reincarnated and you go into a body, another body, what happens to the soul that's in that body? I mean, what do they think happens to it?
Oh, well, baby is born. It doesn't take over.
You were born in another baby.
Yeah, you're born, and you have a body, and you were born with a body. You didn't take over someone's body.
Maybe that's why there's so many people in India.
That's an interesting hypothesis. But the next slide says, how do we achieve salvation? And what I thought might be, Jay and I were talking about this these are concepts that are foreign to most of us. And so you say, what does this really mean? But when you die, you won't get somebody else's body.
You'll go into a new creation.
You'll go into a new creation. It's also the case that there are...
So then that baby was born without a soul?
No, baby,
You've re-embodied. you've re-inhabited a new body. Because you've been reincarnated. So, and by virtue of how you're born, then that comes about as a result, partially, the situation you're in life. If you're born poor, it's because you must have done something wrong in a previous life. If you're born wealthy, you've been good, I would guess. Because the idea of karma then, cause and effect.
Quite a few holes in this.
So are all Hindus working towards salvation
Yes.
as they see salvation?
Yeah, this is the ideal. This is the religious ideal.
Okay.
To work towards salvation, and salvation means stopping the wheel of rebirth.
Not quite as like Groundhog Day.
That's right.
Yeah, not quite like that, right. Yeah.
But you can see, if we as a Christian said, would you like to be born again? They'd say no. Because the goal is not to be born again and again and again and again. Versus for us, we see being born again as being reborn in a perfect place, in a perfect body, in a celestial existence. And for them, it's like, ooh, it's a different approach.
Okay? I
How
love.
do they know when they've achieved where they need, how high they need to go? I mean, after they're rebirths and they're reincarnated, and how do they know when they've reached their pinnacle, let's say? Does that make sense?
Yeah, the question makes sense.
What was the question?
How do they know? There are various strands within Hinduism. I mean, but what you're trying to do in this life, and mentioning there's different yogas. There's a way to God through knowledge, meditation. We've had a movement in this country, transcendental meditation is Hindu in its origins. Way to God through love, which sounds, that second bhakti yoga sounds similar to Christianity. There's some similarities. And it is the most popular way. Karma yoga, way to God through work. And this is interesting. I think it's interesting. If you're born as, or if your dharma is part of being an attorney, or being an artisan, or being a warrior, you commit yourself to your work, but you so commit yourself to work that you're not even aware of the striving. I tried to figure out an example for that might work. If you've ever come close to being so absorbed in what you're doing that you're, most of the time when I'm working, I'm thinking about myself working, especially if I'm mowing the lawn. Maybe some of you get absorbed in mowing the lawn, but, and bless you if that's the case, but you can get absorbed, and you're so absorbed that you lose your sense of self. And if you can do that, Gandhi was committed especially to this karma yoga, way to God through work. And then Raja Yoga, way to God through psychophysical exercises. You have these pictures. Navina Nas, but the pictures we get in Hindu culture, there are people who do all sorts of physical contortions. And it looks, well, to our eyes it looks weird. And they're not physical therapists.
Their hands are going this way and that way, so.
Yeah,
Like
they're
looks like they're contorted.
yeah, and that's a way too. Personally, I'd rather reflection, but that's a way of distancing yourself from yourself. If that makes any sense. Yeah.
Okay, I'm from Japan.
Yes.
Japan is based on Buddhism, which is really similar to
Yes.
Hindu.
Yeah.
So, as a Christian, I experience both. I think reincarnation is not successful. You will not be, not getting the salvation. But in Buddhism, salvation can be obtained by yourself. But Christian salvation can be given by God. That's a big difference. And then, so Buddhism is all about you have to self-train. All these 4 things, you have to self-train, either through knowledge, you have to love, you have to work, you have to, so it's really by yourself. Versus Christianity, God is always with you. He doesn't leave you alone, and He'll take you to salvation, which is heaven. But Buddhism is you have to do it all by yourself. So very self-trained. I believe Christianity has lots of self-train too. You have to self-train yourself to live Jesus' way. That's different. But your salvation, you can only get to it. And then Buddhism, we have like a 7 chance. You have 7 times reincarnation. So you don't make it in 7 times, you don't get to go to heaven. Is it similar? Like we have like a 7 times.
Yeah,
only 7
Hinduism
chances.
also similar. They will undergo 7 times reincarnation,
Yeah.
and the 7th time, according to the philosophy, Brahma took their soul.
That's
If they
it.
do good, they will go to the heaven. If they do bad, they will take to the hell, which is there. It is the god of Yama. Yeah, according to Hindu.
But it's all depends on you, how you train yourself.
It's a variety
And,
of
you know,
works righteousness.
I don't know how to hard to
No.
understand. It's a big difference. God is center. You get to it in the Buddhism or Hindu, but you have to work at it. Salvation in Christianity, Jesus' grace, you get there. But you have to do by yourself. That's a question I have, like how do Hinduism feel the fellowship? Because we don't have so much fellowship in the Buddhism either. Versus Christianity, the greatest part is you have a fellowship. You have each other, that's what God wants you to do. But it's more like a long self-train. Sometimes you feel very individual. That's a big difference.
Yeah, very fundamental difference. What we proclaim and affirm is salvation is by grace through faith, and that not of yourselves. It's the gift of God and not of works. Any kind of work.
They're working themselves to death, trying
Sometimes,
to
yes.
get to wherever they want to get there. And then when they get there,
Well-
There's the fear. If you don't do well, you will go down. And then that's the hardest part for me, your life reflection of the previous life. The hardship I go through, I feel like, what did I do my previous life? But in the Christianity, this is God's plan.
On this view, on Hinduism, anything you did, you deserve whatever bad happens to you.
It's not.
Right.
And I think Hero's pointing out a significant difference is, as Christians, we believe that God has taken the initiative to offer salvation to us, versus it sounds like with Hinduism or Buddhism, we as individuals have to be programmed or have to put forth significant enough effort so that we're able to reach salvation or God, whatever the case may be, versus Christians say God's taking initiative to reach out to us. Now, we believe that there's a choice that each one of us has to make, but God's the one that's taking the initiative as opposed to we have to take the initiative. I think that's significant.
Perfect. Thank you.
I think the word discipline comes to my mind.
Oh, yeah.
That this takes more discipline than we go to Christianity.
I'm seeing quite a few holes in this.
What's that, Richard?
I said, I'm seeing quite a few holes in this for me.
Yeah, well, my motive, and certainly Jay's, was not to engage in any evangelism for Hinduism.
Oh, we
Or
know.
Islam.
We know.
Well, this is much harder. I think.
It is.
I don't like exercise.
Contortions.
Yeah, I would never get to heaven.
Well, the Raja Yoga, it's not really, I said, this is not physical therapy. Therapy, Nancy, as I guess y'all know, has recently had a hip replacement. And she has exercises to do, and some of the rest. Richard, you're the champion here. You've had 3 hip replacement operations. Well, you need to do the therapy, and it hurts, but it's to do good. It's not to distance your innermost being from your sense of selfhood. And this is true. There are different traditions within Buddhism, as there are in Hinduism, but it all centers on, it's a crazy phrase, to distance yourself from yourself, to lose your sense of self, because your sense of self is what keeps you being reincarnated. And so if you do it by meditation, if you do it through work, our concept of work, I think a Christian concept of work, this is a chance to be creative, to fulfill God's will for me. We think we have done, we have callings, and in fulfilling that calling, we are serving God, whether it's farming, or law, or sales, or various teaching even, pastorate. That's a fulfillment. That's self-fulfillment. Now, we have some problems with that. I may get so tied up with work. We have the expression workaholic. You can be so committed to your work that it's destructive of your faith obligations, etc. So, or your family, etc. But ideally, our work is a way of serving God.
Okay, my question is, these all say way to God. Who is God through their, who is God?
Okay, that's another good question. By the way, that's something I learned in teaching. If a student asked a question that I wasn't prepared to deal with, I'd say, that's a very good question. and then while they're feeling good about having asked a good question, I move on to something I can talk about. I think, and there are differences, God is not the Brahman. Brahman is the world soul, is not the God who created Adam and Eve, who walked with Adam in the garden and in the full of the day, who sent his Son to die on the cross for our sins. So it's not personal. It's not a personal God. Now, once I say that, there are all kinds of gods. One of the questions I asked later, we're not going to get to it today, and I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I hope you are. But is Hinduism polytheistic or monotheistic? And the answer is yes. Hinduism has, how many gods?
Totally, they believe that they had 3 crores of gods, but the main gods are 3 of them. They also believe in Trinity, but their philosophy is different. 3 gods united in one single goddess. The 3 gods are united in one single goddess, but strictly speaking, totally there are 3 crores of goddess, whatever. 3 crores. By the time the India population may not be 3 crores, because it is believed that the Hinduism is originated at the period of 1500 BC, like 1500 BC, 1000 to 1800. They believe that average is 1500 BC.
Did you say avatars?
What?
Avatars, is that what you said? I wasn't.
Yeah, it's originated in 1500 BC. Some say that, some philosophies say that it is from 1000 to 1800 BC that Hinduism originated. But by the time the Indian population is not to be the 3 crores, but the God's population is big 3 crores.
Now,
Let's do this. Let's, obviously, this is a different way of thinking. So let's take the notes that Dick has shared with us and maybe kind of ruminate and go over some things. And then how about if we come back in a couple of weeks, because next week we've got ordination, and process some more of these kinds of questions. And one thing that occurred to me, and I'll ask Naveen this, maybe next time we can take this up, is that Naveen and Shirisha, when they were in India, they did physical therapy. And so when you mentioned something about psychophysical exercises, I wondered about how their role as physical therapists, was that seen as a spiritual role or a physical role? You know, we might say, when Richard had his hip surgery, he'd say he's got to go through physical therapy. He might say, by virtue of working and that kind of thing, he found a connection with God. But I would wonder how they would be seen as physical therapists. So maybe we'll leave that question out there. And if you come in a couple of weeks, we can hear sort of the answer. Because you can see if one of the ways that you're going to get to God is by these physical kinds of things, where you're trying to, again, the key thing is you're trying to lose individual consciousness so that you can be absorbed into the greater consciousness, the Brahman. You see how that's different from how we say, well, we know each other in heaven. Well, I know Chuck in heaven and say, hello, Chuck. And we tend to believe yes, and what that looks like we don't exactly know. But you see how we're committed to distinct individuality, where that's not at all the goal that they have.
yeah. When the Atman becomes one with the Brahman, it's not only that you don't know God in heaven, you don't know yourself.
Is that all right with you?
Yeah, that's, we were talking before this, and I thought, this, I've got a bunch of slides, and I could go through them all. But that wouldn't be very helpful. So let's say can we say either on the 6th or the 13th? Because we've got a business meeting coming up on the 20th, and so we'll do another session. And then, Richard, any questions you have, Richard will answer them.
Oh, yeah.
We know less about this religion than some of the others that we've studied.
Yes.
But you can see how, as we mentioned a minute ago, how we might take some of the things that we would say in trying to talk with some of these other world religions, and how we might take something that we would say, and we think we know what we're saying, and how they would hear it. You know, for them, do you want to be born again? No, that's not at all what I want. Versus for us, we see being born again as being transformed into who God would really have us to be. So you see, if you're beginning to speak with someone, you've got to understand their frame of reference to be able to then say, oh, this is what it means for us, versus, so, and that's a part of what Nick and I were hoping to accomplish, would be that we'd be able to understand how people approach things differently. So we'll shoot for a couple of weeks from tonight.
Well, it was a long time ago in high school. I had a teacher who went over that. I guess my world history teacher. That y'all had that too. I mean, we got that in school originally. That background of that. And
I got some of the caste system especially.
yeah, but after we really went over a lot of that, and I still remember that. I mean, you know, that's why that sounds familiar.
All right, well, bless you. Thank you for being here tonight, and join us Sunday night if you have the opportunity, and then we'll see you Sunday morning if not before. Bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.